Hello, this is Felicia Asomaning. Albert Einstein once said, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will spend its whole life believing it was stupid. In other words, where you are is equally as important as who you are. Do you know that there is a place you also belong? Well, today's Destiny Moment addresses the subject of destiny environment, the house that fosters your greatness, nurtures your gifts, and allow your genius to come forth. One of the most powerful scriptures we find in the Bible can be read from the book of Genesis, chapter 2, verse 8. And I read, the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. And I repeat, the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. You see, you must understand that God is a God of system and structures. There is never a time that God will initiate a vision without taking the time to plan and to strategize and to make sure that it succeeds. God, in his sovereignty and in his foreknowledge, knew that he wanted to create man. But before he did that, he started off by first planting a garden. After creating the earth, he didn't just allow the earth to just be it. He went further by planting a garden. And the Bible said that he planted it in Eastward, in a place called Eden. And there he placed the man in. This is really, really important. You must understand, you and I were created to thrive in an environment. We are not called to everywhere. Just as a fish will not survive outside of water, likewise, you and I will not survive outside of the assigned environment that God had ordained for our life. See, the reason why many of us struggle is because we fail to recognize the place that we belong. And so we become jack of all trades and master of none. Think about a plant. A plant starts off as a seed. When it's put in the right soil and it is grounded and it is cultivated and it is nurtured, given in the right nutrients, that plant becomes a mighty tree which bears fruit. Likewise, you and I were also created to be placed in the ideal environment that will allow us to be nurtured and to thrive and grow to become the men and the women that God originally ordained for us to become. But when we fail to recognize this assignment, that environment, and we are not at the assigned place that houses our greatness and allow us to thrive, that is when we struggle. God did not create you and I to be on earth wandering and struggling unnecessarily. He placed you and I here for a purpose, to accomplish a mission. And this mission has an environment that will allow you to become everything you were ordained to become. Now, there are three different environments that I call destiny environment. If you are ever going to be everything that you were born to do, you cannot neglect these three environments. All three are necessary for the fulfillment of your God-given purpose and you living out the destiny he has called you for. The first environment is what I call your spiritual environment or the ideal environment. This is what we see happening with Adam in Genesis chapter 2, verse 8, as we just read. When God placed Adam in the garden, you have to understand that The reason why God placed man in that garden was for two different reasons. Actually, if not the all three. When you keep on reading the chapters, you will realize that in the first environment, which was the spiritual environment that God placed Adam, it was the place that Adam communed with God. The Bible said that God used to come into the garden in the cool of the day to come and fellowship with Adam. Therefore, that environment allowed Adam to commune with God daily. In other words, God made sure that Adam was placed in a place where he can have full access to him. You see, the word Eden is originally means that pleasure. Therefore, if we are looking at it from that context, God made sure that he placed man in the place of pleasure. And the only place where we can have true pleasure and fulfillment is no other place than a place where we have intimate relationship with our Creator. This is the reason why many of us can have all the things that we consider as success in life today. But when we don't have a relationship with our Creator, our life is still empty. We don't feel fulfilled. We don't feel happy. You feel that something is missing in life. Because you and I were created to thrive in the presence of God, the place of pleasure. Number two, you will realize that when God placed Adam into the garden in the garden, he later on gave him an assignment. He told him to cultivate the garden. And also, not only that, eventually he also brought all the animals in that garden for him to name them. In other words, your assigned environment, which brings me to our next step, number two, is always to a geographic location. The first one is a spiritual in nature. But the second environment that you and I were created to function in is a geographic environment. It's the place that I call the environment of preparation. In other words, God Himself, once you are connected to your ideal, your original environment, which you need to thrive and to become everything that God has ordained, He now places you in a place that will allow you to grow in the giftings and the talent and the things He has placed within yourself. Therefore, the first environment is a prerequisite for all the other environment that God will place you in. You cannot fulfill your purpose independent of God. This is why I disagree with the new age people and all these people who don't believe in God, who don't have a relationship with Him, and they think that they are fulfilling their purpose. They may have a clue of some of the giftings and talent that they possess, but to really become everything that you were made to become can only be found when you are rooted and you have a relationship with the creator of your life. In other words, God did not create you to live independent of Him. You were not born to live your purpose outside of the presence of God. So once you are rooted in God, the next thing you will find yourself doing is that He starts giving you responsibilities. He starts placing you in situations and situations that will allow you to be groomed into the person that He has ordained you to be. So the first place, He called Adam into the place. Then He gives him an assignment. He said, cultivate this garden. To cultivate a thing means that you bring out the best out of that thing. So in other words, God was telling Adam that, hey, this is the garden for you. I need you to get creative. I need you to bring out the best from this garden. There's more, but you have some abilities in you, Adam, that you don't know yet. But as I place you in this environment, your giftings will become activated and you will know how best to bring out the best out of this garden. Do you know that sometimes you may not know what you possess, But when you are placed in the right environment, all your giftings begin to come forth. Talent and skills you didn't even know were in you, because the Bible said that God Himself will place a demand on that. Therefore, He said, to whom much is given, much will be required. You will realize that suddenly everybody's coming to you for counseling. Suddenly you see a need, a burden to do something about the situation, because God will make sure that what is in you is nurtured and it comes out of your life. Therefore, when you are in the right environment, the place of preparation, you will realize that there's a lot of demands and responsibilities that you may not even know about. So we see an example with Joseph being placed in Potiphar's house. He thought he was sold as a slave, but God knew that one day He was going to make him as a second to Pharaoh in command, or the prime minister of the nation of Egypt. So He allowed him to be in charge in Potiphar's house, to learn how to manage everything in Potiphar's house. And once Joseph was done, God now placed him again in prison. He thought that that prison experience was a torture, but God knew where He was taking Joseph. So He allowed him to be placed in the prison. And there he continued to learn to manage things and interpret dreams, and also grow in his Egyptian numerical studies and all the system that he needed to know. And when his time was up, God said, now it's time to go to the next environment, which I will be addressing shortly. Likewise, we see it happening with David. He was placed in a situation to be given the responsibility to be a shepherd of his father's flock. And we see that he was wandering in the desert, taking care of flocks. But unknown to David, God was preparing him to become a king. So in the desert, he learned and mastered in his warrior skills. He learned how to fight a bear. He learned how to kill a lion. He didn't know that God was watching him. But as he continued to be faithful and was just serving and taking care of that little few flock, guess what happened? When it was time for him to fight Goliath, he was ready because he had been prepared in the desert. Sometimes too, God positions us in an environment that deals with mentorship from another human being. As an example with Moses and Joshua. Another example is Elijah and Elisha. And another example with Samuel and Eli. And finally, another example is Jesus Christ and the disciples. Even though it may not be a physical environment, for example, with Jesus, it was more of a mentorship. But as they fellowship with their mentor, they learned the experiences that they needed to prepare them for their next environment. Now, this brings me to our next environment, which is the environment of your mandate. If you have been following our Destiny Moment, the last video we talked about mandate, and we said that mandate was the bundle of all the assignments that God will place upon your life. Now, when I say the environment of your mandate, what I'm referring to is that once your preparation is done, once God sees you ready for your assignment, the place that He has ordained for your life, He now places you in different environment to solve different problems. And every assignment that God gives you is always to a place. In other words, your divine assignment is always geographical. After God has prepared you, He now sends you forth, and is always to a place. And once that assignment is done, He sends you to the next one. He sends you to the next one, and then by the end of your life, you have fulfilled the mandate that was placed upon your life. So as much as your preparation for your assignment is really important, the place for you to fulfill that assignment is equally as important as well. There is nothing more frustrating than to be prepared for an assignment and to be placed in the wrong place, you will never come to your fullest potential. People will not accept you. They will not allow you to grow in it. Your weaknesses will thrive and your strength will diminish. In other words, you will be tolerated and not celebrated. But a place where you are assigned to, you will be celebrated and you will be rewarded. In other words, God makes sure that He assigns you to a place whereby you will be received, you will be accepted. Your message that God Himself placed in you will be rewarded. People will accept what you have. But when you are at the wrong place at the wrong time, guess what? Nobody cares about you. You will be fighting unnecessary battles and you will be struggling unnecessarily. So I need you to ask yourself, where you are right now, is it the place that God has ordained for your life, or is the place that you saw it conducive, so you chose there? This makes me realize we see an example with Lot and Abraham. When Abraham was called by God to go to the land that He would show him, God did not tell him to take Lot with him. But Abraham decided to bring Lot alongside. And it turned out that there came a time there was confusion between Lot's people and Abraham's servant. And so Abraham, a man of peace, decided to let Lot choose the place that he considers he prefers, because he wanted peace. And Lot, looking with the natural eye, chose Sodom and Gomorrah, an area that was close to Sodom and Gomorrah, because he saw the place fruitful and he thought it was a place of greener pasture. So he chose that place. But we don't know how it happened. It turned out later on that Lot ended up living in Sodom and Gomorrah. And it came a time that the place was destroyed. And now Lot had to escape for his life. Even with that, there was a divine intervention by God. That is what happens to many of us. When we step out to pursue a call or pursue an assignment, whether it's ministry, business, whatever an assignment that God is instructing us to do, many of us do not ask God where our place of assignment is. So we rush. Some of us decide that we were going to start a church in an area without consulting with God, if that is the place that God has ordained for our lives. So once we start the vision, we realize that we are struggling unnecessarily. The reason why you are struggling unnecessarily is not because God doesn't want to help you. Some of us, it's not because we are not called. It's because we are not placed. We are not thriving at the place God has ordained. Now, does it mean you will not go through trials and tribulations and struggles? Of course, you will go through trials and struggles, and even in the place God has ordained. But in that place, there is the presence of peace. His grace is sufficient through everything that you go through. But when you are in the place of disobedience, you will struggle unnecessarily, and you know that you will be struggling. There are many people right now who have planted ministries at places that God did not call them to. And they wonder why nothing is working. Guess what? God didn't tell you to start it. And you know God did not call you to that place. By your own disobedience, because of whatever agenda you had, decided to help God probably to start something at a place that God did not tell you to do. You see, that is why it is always important that you go back to your source. When you are rooted in your source, He directs your steps. You don't decide where you want your assignment to be. Your Creator, the one who sent you, determines where you are supposed to be. And when you are placed in the place of your assignment, the right environment, nothing is more fruitful and nothing is more rewarding than that. Even the Apostle Paul recognized that although he's a rabbi, when God placed the mandate upon his life to be an apostle, he wasn't called to the Jews. He recognized that his apostleship was to the Gentiles. Therefore, he stayed in his lane and he ministered to the Gentiles. And guess what? He was so influential. In the same way, Peter was also an apostle. But guess what? Peter wasn't called to become an apostle to the Gentiles. So Peter stayed in his lane, which was in Jerusalem, and became the leader of the house of God in Jerusalem. When you know where you are placed, it will also give you an indication of who you are called to, because we are not called to everybody. Your environment that God has ordained to house your destiny and your greatness also brings the people that God has called to minister to. Yes, God told you to start that business, but do you know your ideal market? You may not know your ideal market, but when you find your environment, your ideal market will be in that environment as well. Just as a fish will not thrive outside of water, but place a fish inside the water right now. A fish doesn't talk. A fish doesn't do anything but to swim. But when you place a fish inside either an aquarium or leave the fish in its natural habitat, guess what? The scales begin to be in motion and it begins to release its genius. In the same way, place a bird in the sky and its wings will be in its full potential. Nothing is more frustrating than placing an eagle in the company of a chicken. Its potential to fly will be crippled because a bird as an eagle will never know its potential to soar into higher altitude towards the sun. In the same way, when you and I are placed in the wrong environment, guess what? You will not thrive. You will just struggle. You will never know all the things that God has placed in you. I would like to end with this inspiring true story of a man of God that many of us know and watch on TV and social media. This is a man we all know. His name is Bishop T.D. Jakes. I once heard that Bishop T.D. Jakes started off his ministry in West Virginia. And this man was doing all he could. He was being faithful and serving God in the best of his abilities there. But his ministry was not growing. He was struggling financially wise and everything. But one day, the Lord told him to move to Texas, Houston. And he just obeyed and he came. Once he came here, guess what? Everything about his ministry changed. God now began to explode him exponentially. Not only that, he began to grow and grow and grow. And now he's all over the world. Everybody knows Bishop T.D. Jakes. I believe that West Virginia was his preparation ground. It was his place of preparation. And when his preparation season was over, God moved him. But if Bishop T.D. Jakes refused to move and he has stayed in West Virginia, I do not believe he would have been known today as he is today. But when his time came for him to move to the next level, God moves him. And guess what? His obedience to move to the place with nothing, guess what? Now he is doing massive things for Jesus. And now God is using him to grow and to impact life in beyond what I believe he even saw for himself. That is what happens when we are obedient to God. Stop struggling unnecessarily and go back to your Creator. Let him reveal to you where he has positioned for your life, where he has assigned for your greatness. And as I already mentioned to you, your assignment is not individual. It's not singular. It's in plural form. In other words, your assignments are progressive. God will start you from one assignment, and one is done, he moves you to the next assignments. And then by the end of your lifetime, you fulfill the mandate of God for your life. But each environment is necessary for the next level and the progression of your divine assignments or your mandate. Okay? So it is important that you find the right environment. And where do you find that environment? Your source of life, God Almighty. Even if you don't know what to do with yourself, you don't know where you are supposed to be. As long as you are rooted in your ideal environment, God, it is God's responsibility to place you in the environment of your preparation and also the environment of your divine assignments. It is not your responsibility to place yourself because you did not create yourself. Just as a human being cannot thrive outside of oxygen, so can you not thrive outside of the presence of God. And aside from that, when you are placed outside of your divine assignment, you will not succeed. You will consider being a failure. You will struggle. You will be struggling unnecessarily. But when you are placed in your right environment, your passion will spring forth. Your purpose will be defined and refined. Everything in you will come forth. You will find yourself singing, writing, drawing, designing. Everything in you will come in place because that position and the demand will be placed on you. May God help all of us to find out the environment that He has ordained to house our greatness and to nurture our gifts so we will become everything that He has ordained for your life. Until next time, this is Felicia Asomaning on Destiny Moments. Have a great and purposeful week.